Living in a Star's Light, a novel based on the life of Miss Lotta Crabtree by Steve Lindahl.
This reading is from Chapter 1 of Living in a Star's Light, a novel based on the life of Miss Lotta Crabtree. Lotta ended her stage career as one of the wealthiest and most famous actresses of the 19th century, but she wasn't always at the top. She began as a child, performing on makeshift stages in the gold camps of the California Gold Rush. This reading is from Walter Kane's point of view. He's a young boy growing up in the camps with his friend Frank. Walter had been planning to grease the stage before Lotta began her show, but fortunately he wasn't able to complete his prank and is now excited to see her perform. Cyrus, Frank's pa, and Oliver brought a couple of blankets to see Lotta. They were able to lay them out close to the platform because they were earlier than most of the other miners. "You two sit here and save our place," Oliver told his son. "We're going to get something. We'll be back soon." Miners kept showing up, but the boys managed to keep the men off the blankets. It was annoying, but having something to do made the time go faster. Their fathers smelled of whiskey when they returned, and they were both carrying flasks. Walter shook his head at Frank, but they were used to this behavior. Finally, Lotta's ma walked out from one of the sheds near the stage and stepped up on the platform. "While Lotta's getting ready, I wanted to come out here to thank you boys. We love being among miners. You know how to have fun, and so do we." Some of the men whistled, and one shouted something obscene. Lotta's ma shook a finger at him, then laughed and shouted, "Here she is, the one and only Lotta Crabtree." She began the applause. The men joined her as Lotta came out of the shed and skipped up onto the platform. Lotta had a banjo with her and began playing Camptown Races, but after one time through the chorus, she handed the instrument to Jake Wallace and started dancing. As Jake continued the song, she began a jig. She tapped her heels 12 times, then hopped and crossed her legs back and forth until Walter felt himself going cross-eyed. Before long, Lotta was kicking her heels up and tossing her petticoats side to side. This was no average Irish jig. Lotta was high-stepping. Her light blue long-sleeved top with a white collar brought out the shine in her eyes. Her checkered skirt with light and dark blue squares lifted like a sail as she turned round and round. Her red hair was pulled back, but so many strands were loose, swinging by the side of her head as she moved. "Thank God we didn't grease the stage," Walter said to Frank. "Why'd you let me even think about doing that?" "Me?" Frank shouted, but Walter didn't turn to look at his friend. They both had their eyes on the girl bouncing in front. Their fathers couldn't hear what they were talking about because the drunken men were attempting to sing, but just yelling along with the music. "Doo-dah, doo-dah," they screamed. Somebody threw a leather purse, probably loaded with gold pieces. Walter's pa joined in by tossing a watch he'd won in a poker game. Walter saw him do it but didn't say anything. The boys were into the music every bit as much as their fathers were. "Camptown ladies, sing this song." Frank and Walter belted out together, rocking back and forth to the beat of Lotta's swaying body. When Lotta finished her first song, she slowed way down and started, "I've left the snow-clad hills." Walter sat down. He was having trouble breathing. He'd seen Lotta dance 2 years before, but she was even prettier now. And when she sang soft and mellow, she looked right at him. He couldn't help but dream about such a wonderful girl. When Lotta left the stage, Walter lay back on the blanket and closed his eyes. He thought about panning for gold. His pa had taken him by the creek a few times, so he knew what to do. He painted a picture in his head of Lotta waiting for him. She was dressed in the same blue blouse and skirt she'd been wearing when she danced. She twirled around him like she'd done on stage, sending her blue checkered skirt and clean white petticoat spinning through his head like white-capped waves. He dug loose dirt on the bank, then shook it through a strainer into his pa's pan and dumped the remaining worthless stones. Then he stepped back to the creek with Lotta close behind, her warm breath on his neck as he filled the pan with water. Walter swished the mixture until a dozen nuggets appeared, each bigger than his pinky finger. Lotta sighed, saying, "You did it, Walter. We're rich." There were other daydreams as well of walking with Lotta to the fishing lake, holding her hand as Frank followed with the poles, of living in Lotta's beautiful boarding house with her cooking his meals while he counted their gold, and of Lotta lying beside him at night outside on a blanket, counting the stars. Walter had always felt a strange mixture of emotions when Lotta was around. Sometimes he was so jealous of the money she had and the exciting life she led, he could explode with anger. But other times he just wanted to talk to her, to watch her, and to be near her. Around Lotta, Walter was as unpredictable as a grizzly bear. That's when Walter felt a hand on his shoulder shaking him. "Open your eyes," Frank said in a low voice. "She's coming." Walter jolted up and stared. It was Lotta, all right. She'd changed out of her dancing dress into a loose brown dress with a white apron. She no longer had the layer of petticoats fluffing out, but her legs were still covered with bloomers. Her dress was long, but since she was sitting, he could see her ankles when she took a step. He stood, noticing she was slightly shorter than he was, even though she was a year or so older. "Hello, Walter," Lotta said. "Do you remember me?" He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Did he remember Lotta? Of course he remembered. Everyone knew Lotta Crabtree. He couldn't think of what to say, so he did the only thing he was capable of doing. He nodded his head. "Good. My ma pointed you out to me. You've changed so much. I wouldn't have recognized you if she hadn't. I met you a couple of years ago at Mark Taylor's saloon. You and your pa slept on the floor that night and were there the next morning. I thought that seemed like fun. We're always moving from camp to camp. Even when I'm in Coulterville, I'm dancing at the saloon. I never get a chance to do any of the things other children do." Walter nodded his head again. Frank reached his hand out to Lotta. "I'm Frank, Walter's partner." Lotta said, "Nice to meet you, Frank." She did not, however, shake his hand, so he dropped it to his side. She turned back to Walter. "Why does a boy like you need a partner?" she asked. "We're more like friends than partners," Walter told her. "We do everything together." "Everything?" "Yup," Frank said. "That sounds nice. I don't have friends because I'm always traveling. You two doing anything tomorrow? If so, I'd like to come along. I don't have to leave until afternoon." "We go fishing almost every day," Frank said. Walter added, "I can make a pole for you. Show you how to use it." "That would be very nice," Lotta told him. "I'll be here tomorrow first thing in the morning and I'll bring victuals." This time both Frank and Walter could do nothing but nod. Their fathers continued to wobble a bit from drinking, but still worked that evening with the men who tore down the platform and rebuilt the wall of the bunkhouse. So the next morning there was nothing but an empty field when Walter and Frank went. They looked around for only a moment until Lotta came into sight. She was wearing the same brown dress she'd had on the day before and carrying a picnic basket. She walked up to them with a bright smile and greeted them with a "good morning," which had a delightful sing-song tone to it. Lotta opened the basket so the boys could peek inside. She had packed ham, a few hard-boiled eggs, a loaf of white bread, 3 baked potatoes, and a tub of what appeared to be butter. Walter hadn't eaten this well since the Christmas dinner they'd attended at the town church, and they'd had to walk miles for that. This is what it's like to be rich, he thought, as he felt his stomach harden. "Ma prepared this," Lotta told them. "She said if I was to get me a sweetheart, I had to bring good food." "A sweetheart?" Frank gasped, his eyes bulging. "I mean Walter, Frank. Ma says he's well looking for a young boy." Walter stared at Lotta, his mouth open, but no words came out. "Take it easy, both of you," Lotta said. "I'm just horsing around. Let's go fishing."
Living in a Star's Light is available on Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com.